Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here at my next Avatar comic review. This is going to be my spoiler review for Smoke and Shadow Part 3. Up on my channel already you will find my non-spoiler review for the book, as well as a video where I talk about why you should listen to a podcast that I recently did on Sunday, which is the most in-depth review for this book you are probably going to find online. It is like a 3.5 hour podcast, kind of read-through, discussion, analysis podcast about this book. What I'm going to talk about here is basically just going to be kind of summing up some of my points that I made in that video. And I'm not going to be able to cover everything that I touched on in that podcast that I touched on here. So if you want the most in-depth analysis on this book, check out that podcast, because there's only so much I can do in a video here. And that podcast includes other people, and you'll get some more opinions on the book as well. So a link to that podcast is in the description, but I'll do my best to make this spoiler review interesting enough. So yeah, you know my general thoughts on the book, and it really hasn't changed all that much. I feel a little bit more positively about the book now, in that I see some of the more subtle connections in terms of how they went about resolving some of the plots. I think I've highlighted, more clearly what my problems are with the book, and it is more related to the main plot and how actually fairly weak the main plot is and how strong some of the side plots are. But yeah, let's just get into the book and talk about which is strong, what's weak. The star of this book is Azula, of course. She makes her big return here since the end of the Search, and she is a very different character from then. When she ended that series, she was in a very bad place mentally. She was very confused. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know whether she should continue with the plan with Ozai. She should try to make up with her mother, with her brother. In the end, she just ran away, and we didn't know really where she was going, what she was up to. And this book doesn't really clarify a ton about what she was up to in between the two series. We established that she went back to the mental institution that she was in and freed about six more of the girls who were in that mental institution. And those 6 other girls are the other Kamurakage. So there's more than just 3 of them. They seem to primarily just go around in a group of 3, Azula and 2 others. But there are other ones of them as well. We don't get a lot of in-depth information on these characters. We know the name of one of them. One of them's name is Zirin, Z-I-R-I-N. And yeah, they all have very interesting designs, very unique. But again, we only know the name of one of them. We don't have a character really for the other ones as well. Just that there's some form of alliance here. But again, that isn't really built up all that much. I think that is probably to come in a future comic series about Azula and what she was up to and what she's going to be doing next. The main thing with Azula here is that she is much clearer of mind in this book than she was before. She is very similar to how she was in Avatar The Last Airbender Book 2, but there is still a slightly unbalanced edge. When she starts to kind of get rolling and get a little bit emotional about things, she gets very kind of wide-eyed and crazy, a little bit manic, and gets right up in people's faces, and there's a little bit of lack of composure and more intensity about some of her plans than there would be before. She talks to Ukano about, okay, the next thing I want you to do is to start a riot, and he's like, what do you want me to do that for? And she just gets up in his face and he's just like, to get what I want, you have to do to get what you want, you have to get me what I want, and what I want is a riot. And she's this close to him. It's pretty intense, and the artists, Team Gurihuru, do a great job at really getting that across. She's clear a lot of the time, but it just gradually breaks into a little bit more of that manicness. So, is she kind of fully clear mentally? Not just yet. I think there's still a lot of problems to be dealt with. But later on in the comic, we do get established what her goal was, what the plan was here, and what she's all about now. Earlier on, she revealed that her aim here is not anything to do with Ozai. Ozai is not part of this plan at all for Azula anymore. So that's fascinating. That was Ukano's take on the plan the entire time, that it was to get Ozai back on the throne. But it's not. It's also not to get Azula on the throne either. Azula and Zuko fight later on in the comic. She gets the better of him, is kind of standing over him, fire dagger in hand. She could finish Zuko off if she wanted to, and she says, "Me standing over you like this, why does it feel so familiar? Oh right, that's because this is the way it's always been." Zuko says, "Getting rid of me won't put you back on the throne, Azula. Just accept it, you will never be Fire Lord." And she says, "Accept it, I've embraced it. I know I will never be Fire Lord because I'm not meant to be Fire Lord. You were right all along, Zuzu. Once I discovered my own destiny, that voice in my head finally shut up. I felt weightless ever since, free maybe for the first time in all my life. My destiny, you see, is to make you into the Fire Lord I tried to be. One who's strong, one who rules through fear." So that is her plan. She has this kind of weird way of thinking that she is like helping Zuko to become the Fire Lord that he's meant to be, which is basically making Zuko the figurehead of what she is meant to be as the Fire Lord. It's an interesting idea. As we'll see later, the execution is a little bit weirdly done, but it's a really cool idea that she's just accepted. She's not meant to be Fire Lord. She had her chance to rule the Fire Nation, and it didn't go well. She had a like mental breakdown because of like what happened before, the stress of doing with that, and she realizes now that that's not what she's meant to be. Zuko is the one who's meant to be Fire Lord, but what she can do is influence the way that he is the Fire Lord. And she's trying to like, basically this whole plan was to force Zuko to become this person, one who rules through fear. She continues on and says, "Can't you see it's already working?" And she says, "In the last 24 hours, I've shown just how ruthless you can be. Deep down inside, you're still one of us. You can deny it for a little while, but eventually you'll become just like me. And then, in a sense, I'll be Fire Lord again." And Zuko denies it. Now, the problem with that, even though it's a really cool idea, is that the kidnapping plot, incorporating Ukano into the plan, and the Safe Nation Society, the New Ozai Society, and all of this stuff, kidnapping of the kids, it was all to force Zuko to make a rash decision that would turn the people against him and make him appear to be ruthless. That is a cool idea in concept. How it is executed in this book is not very well done, because the entire time Zuko is making this decision, you actually understand the decisions he's making. He holds back on making a really rash decision like that for like the entire series, and it's only here, like a couple of pages into Smoke and Shadow Part 3, that he finally says, like, "I don't know what to do. Look, Azula is back in play now. My sister's been kidnapped. May's brother's been kidnapped. So many other kids have been kidnapped. The only way to deal with this is to deal with the people that I know for sure are involved in this, because May informs him that her father is involved, so he knows that the Safe Nation Society is involved. The people aren't really aware of that, but he knows it's true. So he basically just orders his troops to go out and arrest the Safe Nation Society. But again, the problem with this is that the people see them as heroes because they orchestrated this kind of false saving of one child from the Khmer Kage, when in fact it was Ukano making his group look like heroes when it wasn't actually the case. So he has his guards going to people's houses looking for evidence. They arrest the New Ozai Society in the middle of the streets. Ukano starts a riot like Azula wanted, and it's just chaos in the Fire Nation, and apparently Zuko has made this awful decision. The problem is that we understand his decision. Azula's in play, all of this other stuff is happening. You understand why he would make a slightly harsher decision than usual. You understand why he would temporarily relieve Constable Sung of duty in the second part. That was an entirely reasonable thing he did, and Kalo even agreed with him. That, look, he's the Fire Lord, he's in charge. The Constable can't just go disobeying the order of command just because he thinks he knows the right thing to do. Zuko's the one in charge. In part 1, they tried to make Zuko out to be ruthless as well, with the whole scene where he's on top of the Fire Nation carriage and he blocks all those fire blasts and just says, I'm the Fire Lord, if you don't want to get hurt, stay away. You understand, he's defending his family, he's defending against these people who are attacking him for no reason. Like, that doesn't make him out to be ruthless. In no way am I interpreting this as Zuko slowly becoming Ozai again. I think we are long past that. That was what the promise was about. And I think Azula is unaware of the fact that Zuko is different now. But again, I'm not sure if we are meant to interpret this as Azula is kind of not thinking clearly and cannot see that this plan is going to work, can't see that her plan is going to fail, basically, or if we're actually meant to believe that Zuko has made a really ruthless decision and really bad stuff is going to happen going forward. That's where the execution of this fails, in that Zuko hasn't actually done something all that bad, like Azula thinks she has. She says here, I'll say the quote again, "In the last 24 hours I've shown just how ruthless you can be." No, you haven't. Like, really, you haven't. Like, you can split hairs and say that, oh, she has, but really, like, Zuko in no way is like Ozai at this point in time. And there are tons of reasons for why, there are justifications for why you made these slightly rash actions. And now it ultimately leads to this speech that Zuko gives at the end. The whole Azula thing, she eventually runs off, just leaving doubt in Zuko's mind. He gives a speech to the Fire Nation, the people of the Fire Nation capital. He just gathers them all there and gives a speech and just talks about how it's been traumatic, our kids were taken, everyone was fearful, it was chaos. I responded poorly. I made these bad decisions, not based on wisdom but on fear. I ask that you please forgive me. I shouldn't have ever done this and that. I resolved to do better, to continue to be a Fire Lord worthy of being your Fire Lord. And he's basically apologizing to them for everything that happened. We cut to basically all of the characters that were against Zuko kind of looking on at this. And then we, at the very end, cut to Azula and two of the other Khmer Kage on top of the rooftops, out of sight. She has her mask off as she listens to him saying this. She puts it back on and says, "How touching," and they disappear. What am I meant to take from that? Is Azula happy that Zuko has delivered this apology? Is she thinking that, like, still work to be done to make Zuko into the person I want to be? It falls very flat, this final moment with Azula, where she's watching on at Zuko give this big apology, and it seems like the people are for the most part accepting it, but I don't know what to take from the ending, in that I don't think Zuko needs to be this apologetic. I understand the aim of this and the importance of this, but I don't think he needed to be as apologetic as he was here. Now, the key thing here, I think, is that the people of the Fire Nation are not used to this happening at all. Sozin, Azulon, Ozai would never come out in front of all their people and apologize for the decisions that they made. They made a big point of that back in The Promise, that, like, Ozai's big thing was, like, any decision you make as Fire Lord is correct because you are the Fire Lord. It doesn't matter if you think you're right or think you're wrong, or are siding with the strong or siding with the weak. Your decision is correct because as Fire Lord you have the right to be correct because you made the decision, you have that position of power. Zuko's going against that. He is doing something different here, something that the Fire Nation people are not used to, something that would never have happened before. And I don't quite get the reaction to it here. Because I don't know if they're trying to imply that Azula was actually trying to get Zuko to be apologetic for what he did, but she was the one who forced him to do that, so that doesn't quite work. She's coming back, absolutely. She's still in play. She has defeated... She's got the better of Zuko this one time and has fled, and has put some doubt in his mind, but it doesn't have the impact that I think it should have. But I think the general theme of what they're going for with Azula really worked very well. Because the other thing is a more subtle thing, is where the final battle actually takes place. It's in this secret royal family graveyard where all of the people who are not the Fire Lords in the royal family are buried. It's so secret that barely anyone knows about it. The gravestones are all, like, unmarked, no one knows who they are, there's no names written on them. A huge contrast to the Fire Lord's tomb, where there's murals all over the place. You know absolutely who each character is, who each Fire Lord was, all the way back to the first Fire Lord, while all the other people are forgotten. And their final battle between Zuko and Azula takes place inside the crypt of the advisor to the first Fire Lord. Now, we met the first Fire Lord a little bit in part 2. We know who he is, how the Khmer Kage ultimately, like, kind of left the world. They stopped being kind of vengeful after he kind of took power in the Fire Nation. But we're getting introduced to this kind of unknown advisor. And the idea they're going for is that Azula what we're meant to think is Azula is kind of wanting to become the unknown advisor to Zuko. Now she's doing it through very weird means and like more villainous ways, forcing his hand. But that's the idea, that she's accepting that she won't be remembered. She's not going to be the Fire Lord who gets the big burial in the Fire Lord's tomb. She's happy to be the one who's forgotten and buried in this graveyard. But once she knows that she was helpful, and she helped the Fire Lord to become what she sees as being helpful, she's fine with that. I think that's a really interesting little kind of idea that they don't hit home too hard, but they definitely symbolically make it out to be important, that this is where Azula has the main HQ for the Khmer Kage, in this graveyard. But cool idea, just some of the execution about how her plan was actually meant to succeed with regards to Zuko doesn't quite work for me. So yeah, I've talked a decent amount already just about Azula, so I'll quickly go through some of the other stuff. Ursa, I think, is resolved exceptionally well in this book. I was very annoyed in part 2 that she really wasn't a focus at all, but she comes back here and has two really important scenes. The first is with Iroh, and she is just on her own, kneeling down in this, I assume it's like a Fire Nation prayer room kind of thing. Iroh comes back, he's returned from Yudao, and he sits beside her. And you get the idea that a decent amount of time passes before they begin to speak. Ursa then kind of does speak, and she says, I made this doll with my own hands. You could tell from the terrible stitching. It was her present last year. Kiyi carried with her everywhere she went, until the night my face changed back. Now she won't touch it. Now she won't touch me. What if this is how it always will be from now on? What if I never get the chance to? And Iroh says, we have no reason to lose hope, Ursa. And she then kind of changes the subject and says, can I ask you something, Iroh? Something terribly personal. How did you get over the death of your son? And he says, I'm not over it, I never will be over it. And he gives this really nice kind of little bit of a speech to her about how, as parents, we want nothing more than for our kids to be safe, even though the world is so very unsafe and there's so much to fear. But it's better to teach them and ourselves to, see the fear with unclouded eyes. And that's the big thing here, unclouded eyes. Seeing things for what they just really are, rather than like kind of almost like blowing something further out of proportion than it actually is, and being afraid of like this kind of construct you've made it out to be. And Ursa says, I try to stay positive, honestly I try, but it's all just a mask. Deep down all I feel is fear. And he says, Ursa, the fear will always be with you, always. Even after she returns, you must learn to see with unclouded eyes. Now, there's some really nice stuff there. Obviously, the unclouded eyes stuff is fairly straightforward. But it's the idea that Ursa talks about her mask, that she's been trying to be positive around Kiyi and make it out that there's nothing wrong. But she is terrified being back at the palace. And she's putting on this mask of positivity. And there's the implication that Kiyi, yes, was initially freaked out by her mother's face changing. But the implication is that she's gotten over that fairly quickly. The problem is that now her mother is acting so weirdly to her, that she's acting positive when there's this clearly scared look in her eyes, that she can sense how cold her mother's hands are. And that's why she's staying away from Ursa, because Ursa is a different person than she knows her as. And that's why Kiyi's backing away. And they come back to it later on, and that, like, the next scene is a little bit of a surprise in that, like, they barely mentioned Ozai this entire comic, yet he'd seemed so important before. Yet here we go. Ursa and Iroh go to Ozai in prison. Iroh quickly just says, remember unclouded eyes, and lets her go in alone. And immediately she walks in, and he just starts shouting at her, I promised if I ever saw you again, I would end you and everyone you ever loved, but I'm going to do so much more than that. By the time I'm through, you will beg for oblivion. You hear me, you wretched thing, you will beg. And she's panicking, but then she closes her eyes, opens them up again, and she's now seeing him unclouded for the first time. And she very clearly just says to him, after all these years, I finally see you, Ozai. You're just a small, small man, trying with all your might to be big. Your heart is so small, you've no room for your son or your daughter or your brother or even yourself. Goodbye, Ozai. And she just walks out. And he starts, shouting at her, trying to get her to come back so he can intimidate her. But she just lets it go away. She just walks out, and that's it. That's all she needed. She just sees that he's not the monster that she's been panicking about in her head the whole time. She is just this man who is weak now. He's in prison. All he has are big words. He has no power anymore, and he also doesn't have heart. And you can apply this to Azula as well, because Ozai raised Ursa to be effectively the same as him. And that's another thing that Azula doesn't have. She also doesn't have heart. You never would really refer to her as like having love for anyone else. And that's something I think she badly needs to address. Because a lot of people are saying, oh, Azula's better now. She's not a villain anymore. She absolutely is still a villain, because she's still talking about controlling people through fear. If she had properly developed, she wouldn't be talking about that anymore. She would realize that that is her biggest weakness, that the reason she had that mental down spiral in ATLA was because her control through fear broke, and that happened. And so that still has to be addressed. She still has to learn what it is to have relationships with people where it's not controlling them, not using fear, but actually caring about someone because you love them and stuff like that. That's the problem with Ozai. That's the problem with Azula especially. Ozai, I think, is basically beyond redemption, but Azula is young. She hasn't really been taught the other side of things because of the way the family grew up. I think there's still a chance for Azula, but they haven't addressed it just yet. But you can see where the overall goal is, perhaps, if they're going for any sort of redemption for Azula. But we do get a resolution to Kiyi and Ursa. Ursa does return to Kiyi, who's now in bed after being saved. And it's a very simple resolution. She just goes up to her. Kiyi is in bed. She puts her hand over the covers where Kiyi is. Kiyi wakes up, turns around and says, "Mommy, you're back." And Ursa says, "I'm back." And Kiyi allows Ursa to get into the bed with her and kind of, I suppose, snuggle up next to her. A really nice mother-daughter moment. And it's nice because there was no need for a lot of dialogue here in terms of Kiyi explaining why she felt bad and why she now doesn't feel bad about Ursa. All that was needed was that, like, Kiyi is just happy that her mother is actually back now. Her hands aren't cold anymore. That mask of fear is gone. She's back to the person that she knew, even though her face is different. Because the face was just a temporary issue that Kiyi had basically gotten over herself. And I really like that. And that's the last page of the book. It ends with that "I'm back" Ursa moment. Weird page to end it on, but I think it works. With Kiyi, the big reveal we get is that she's actually a firebender. A really cool reveal on how that happens, in that she's actually brought to the other kids where they are, and she immediately plans to escape. She starts practicing some firebending moves that she saw Zuko do, and manages to burn through the door. It's in a really cool moment, because Ukano at this point in time is realizing that he has to get the kids to safety because Azula is just going to keep them there forever. But he's helpless because he doesn't have the key to the door because Azula took it from him. So Kiyi bursts through the door with firebending, and they manage to get out that way with the help of Ukano. Now, the cool thing about this is that the moves that she's doing are the dancing dragon. So she saw Zuko practicing in the courtyard one time and is now practicing that herself. And we get the reveal she is in fact a firebender. Nothing overly important is said in relation to Kiyi being a firebender, in that we don't get any sort of a reaction from Zuko to it, of Ursa to it. Just the kids being like, "Whoa, Kiyi is awesome that she freed us," and doing that. She seems to be fairly powerful, being able to like melt the door down, but again, we don't know if that's trying to suggest that Kiyi is actually a super powerful bender, or just that, look, the door wasn't that strong, so she was able to get through it with even basic firebending. So that's a cool little reveal. I'm pretty much going to end it on like Ukano, and then I'll talk a little bit about the romances. Ukano actually has a really good conclusion to his little arc here. At the end, he goes to prison, but he did enough in this part to make it so that May doesn't hate him. She's aware that, like, yes, you do deserve to go to prison for what you did. You have to serve some sort of punishment for what you did. But I will choose to remember you as being brave, is what she says to him just as he's left. And he's happy with that. That he's happy that he managed to, get Tom Tom back to the rest of his family, and he's going away, and he's aware that he deserves to be punished for what he did too. But he's happy, and there's hope that the family could come back together at some point, because the big thing with Ukano here is that he finally comes to the conclusion that really family comes before everything. His own political goals, like getting Zuko off the throne, getting Ozai onto the throne, that doesn't matter. All that matters is that his family is safe, that he shouldn't have sacrificed his family for those political goals. And he quickly realizes that Azula is not really going to fulfill the deal that they had, and that is releasing the kids as soon as possible. She constantly comes in and says, no, one more part of the plan, we'll keep the kids here a little bit longer. And he quickly realizes he has no power in this relationship with Azula. She has the complete control, he can't do anything. And he tries to stand up and break the kids out, but of course Azula takes the key. And there's a really nice scene of him just crying on the other side of the door, unable to get through it. And this is obviously when Kiyi burns the door down, and she kind of saves Ukano, basically. He just talks about how sorry he is for everything he did, and that the kids are more important than almost anything else. And it just, I didn't expect to in any way have any sympathy for Ukano, but they managed to get some out of me, and I really appreciate that. The relationship stuff is weirdly done. Mei and Zuko are not back together by the end of this book, but Mei has broken up with Kalo, or Kalo has broken up with Mei. It's not very clear. We just get this weird final moment where, through Mei's Aunt Mura's perspective, she sees the two of them talking outside. We don't see the dialogue, just we see them talking, and then all of a sudden we cut to the next page. Mei has her hands over her face like she's kind of crying. Kalo kind of has his head down, and then he kind of wipes his arm over his face like that he's been crying. So there's clearly been some form of emotional breakup. We don't know who broke up with who, just that's what's happening. And then Kalo just walks off and basically says to Aunt Mura that I have stuff to do. I don't know if I'll ever be back. Maybe never. And he just walks off, and that's it. That's how the book ends with Kalo's character. No idea what he's going off to do. No idea why the breakup properly happened. Who broke it off? What's happening? And no furthering of the Zuko Mei relationship in terms of them getting back together immediately. Now I will say, the book before that has a ton of moments that hint towards Mei and Zuko. Little looks, little handholds, little kind of symbolic moments, absolutely. And in terms of the breakup, the only real setup is that Mei has this moment where Zuko's going off to fight Azula, and Kalo's been injured, and she says to Kalo in relation to that, love hurts, but she's staring right at Zuko when she says it, and Kalo's looking at her. So I think the implication that we're meant to take from that is that Mei is having this big realization. Apologies about that, my camera just ran out of battery, but anyway, what I was just talking about was Mei saying the line, love hurts, looking at Zuko, but saying it kind of to Kalo. And I think what they're going for here is that this is Mei realizing something about her relationship with Zuko. That relationship can have its problems, and that doesn't mean that they need to be broken up. I think that's ultimately where they're going, this idea that Mei was very quick to break off the relationship the second something went wrong. And now, over the course of this story, she's kind of realized that you can actually deal with these things. You can talk and get past them, and that it is a part of a relationship. It's not just all happy, that there are problems as well, and that ultimately she does care more for Zuko than Kalo. Now, it still doesn't really explain if she broke up with Kalo or Kalo broke up with her, or what on earth is going on with Kalo, but it is some progress, I do think. I think it's a more subtle part of the comic, but that panel where you just see her kind of looking on, it's not a jokey type face that she's saying love, you know what they say, love hurts, to Kalo next to her. It's a lot more kind of like, I've just had a realization here, talking more towards Zuko. Other than that, there are a few other little bits, like there are two specific moments from the past that Azula, May, and Ty Lee refer to in relation to their past. Ty Lee mentions that they used to play hide and go seek together, and this relates to how they discovered the entrance into the secret royal family graveyard. In that, when they played hide and go seek when they were younger, Azula they'd never be able to find Azula because she actually used the secret passageways throughout the royal capital city, throughout the Fire Nation capital city, to kind of stay out of their sight. And then there's this other mention of this time when they all had a sleepover at May's house, and this was where Azula got the idea to use the Kage as the kind of theme for her new group, in that it's this, the idea is that they take revenge, against people who wrong other people, and she specifically remembers May after they stole some food from her mother, thinking that the Kage were going to take her away, because that's the whole kid's tale. And so Azula remembers that, and so decides to use that as the theme for her group. It's just two little mentions, given that Ty Lee and May are both in the story, Azula's there. They do have a nice scene between Azula and May that's pretty well done, referencing a little bit about the past from ATLA. But yeah, I'm going to end the video there, because otherwise I'm going to be forever talking about this comic. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on the book in general, but I will just end by saying, if you want more analysis, if you want my thoughts on every single page from the book, check out the podcast, linked in the description below. It's probably one of my favourite podcasts that I've ever done, in terms of the amount of depth that we went into on that comic, and the amount of discussion, the amount of things I think I figured out just analysing in that detail. So yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.